Oh,
Yes.
here we
You,
go.
d-
Here we go. Here we go. Here we
you
go.
got us. You got us.
Good everything. Yes. Hi. Hi, Dr.
Hey, what's going on? How's everything? Hey, what's going on, Professor Hunter? Everything good?
Yes. And
Good, good.
if it wasn't, I would still say yes. Because
Well, because we're here.
yep, I believe in speaking things into existence. We got up this morning. We are
We did
breathing.
indeed. We
We,
did indeed. It's a
we're,
beautiful thing.
yeah, we're here
It's
to
a
do
beautiful thing. Yeah, we are. So, how are things going? Uh-oh. All right, I'm tripping. Yeah,
nothing.
I was no, no,
It's
no.
all
That's what I get. No, everything is fine. Yeah, we're good. Yes,
okay.
indeed. So, yeah, we're in the streets every May. I've been trying to do this now for, well, since before COVID, trying to get away, and we're going to get there. We might even get there this summer, a little bit later, but being, around the whole idea before COVID was to do intellectual CSI with Howard students, but fortunately that has evaporated like mist on a morning, on a beautiful summer morning. So we're not going to do that with Howard students. There may be a few that end up in the contingent, but the vision is much larger now. And so even as it's just been me these past couple of years going out and around, some kind of way May has tracked with a nice start to it. So I was in Birmingham yesterday with the national organization of county officials, national organization of Black county officials, NOPCO, and we got a chance to talk with a number of them. Lamont and I yesterday morning on Sirius, and we'll say more about that in a moment. But and then next week in Atlanta, be with Sister Melanie Campbell. We talked to the Black Women's Political Roundtable. Going to be able to sit with them. They're having their conference over at Clark, Atlanta, the National Coalition of Black Civic Participation. So they're going to be doing their conference on Southern Organizing Leadership the 3rd through the 5th of June at Clark. So that's going to be interesting. So a lot of local political organizers, elected officials, non-elected officials, um, organizers, community organizers, people who are doing what's when you hear what was the first time you heard the word the work? The work. We're doing the work. Yeah.
I don't think I did hear it, not in my youth, you
No, I
know.
know I didn't hear it. Yeah, yeah, no question.
Um and I've always kind of been not an armchair, but an observer. I'm somebody that will go to a party and sit in the corner and observe. I'm not
Yes,
gonna be out there dancing. I'm gonna be in the
yes,
corner observing and taking notes. So,
yes.
I always kind of saw myself as the viewer, the not a voyeur
Mm,
because I'm taking notes with a purpose. But now I'm in it, which I never imagined. I never imagined myself being part of the work. So I never thought about
interesting.
that work,
Yeah,
now
yeah.
I don't do you think people grow up thinking I'm going to be part of the work, or do you think people imagine themselves in a time such as this and doing something, or do you think people imagine themselves doing something? Because I at this point can't imagine myself not doing something. But
Right.
and the work for the way I look at it takes so many different forms, right? It's
Hmm.
and I was going to ask you, going to these events and these conferences, and you've been doing it for 30 years. it- what's the value for you? What is it that you get from them, and what are you bringing?
Community is the first thing that comes to mind. You know, we often question people's motives, but I think that's has more to do with us than it does with anybody outside of ourselves. So for me, it's a reminder that people are basically decent, and that Black people in a racist country like this want to be able to live. And those who come to places where they hope to find other people who are willing and able to fight and struggle together get reaffirmed in that desire and commitment to do something about it, and also get affirmed and reminded that in doing that quote unquote work, which is why I asked you, and I know we didn't come up with that phrase, it's come recently. It it creates the space to be the way you want to be if you
Mm.
didn't have to fight. I
Mm.
think that's what it is. I mean,
No,
in those moments, yeah, it makes you, you're free.
but these
You're
spaces,
free.
are usually addressing. So when I was at the Daily News, Jonathan Capehart has a new book out. We would on the editorial board every Saturday go to what we called our Precious Lord in Harlem, which was National Action Network, and they would have their thing. And boy, did we first of all, it was very interesting, it was the same gathering every Saturday. I would also spend time at the mosque 125. That's what I'm saying, being an observer, you get to be in these spaces. And so your view is not inside out, it's outside, and you're seeing all of the iterations.
Hmm.
Now,
Hmm.
in many ways, I'm inside building, which is it's a trip if I'm honest about it, because I have this memory of things. And what was very remarkable was that it would be like a diminish would be the same people, and then the crowd would get thinner and thinner.
Oh
And
yeah,
my
for
question was
sure.
always like, okay, so the work is going to be done by the few. The Bible says that, right? If you believe the
That's
Bible,
right.
whether you don't,
That's right.
that's your business. But it's like the workers are few. You get to see it in real time until there are these inflection points, whether it's some are George Floyd, before that, Mike Brown, there are these inflection points that bring people to the street, but it's still what you were talking about this morning, centers the trauma. You're saying
Yeah.
you
Oh,
go,
no question.
you go for the community, but if the
Yeah.
community is centered on the trauma and addressing the trauma, and not just y'all not boots on the ground. There's no flags. Y'all not, flapping the fans.
Ah,
It's not just community. It's work. And if I'm always working in community, what does community, to your point, look like in in liberation? What are we doing in liberation?
I think it looks like the moment that we are together, and anything that prevents that becomes the thing that we must organize against. So that spirit of generosity that we often talk about has to always be spoken, I think, articulated, and as a kind of point of entry, because there is a generosity when we are together as people. And the suspicions come, I think, when we are not open and overt in articulating that. And even when we do articulate that, there's still suspicion if we don't know the people. So, phrase obviously in African American English, at least in terms of an idiom, idiom dimension of the language. I don't know you like that. You know what I'm saying? The like that means we do not have experiences together that would lead me to not be suspicious.
Correct.
And so I think that is what it looks like is when we are together. And it's interesting. Uh, the reason I'm back here in the deep South and was in Birmingham yesterday, day before yesterday, and yesterday, late Thursday night, no, late Wednesday night, and then Thursday was the good brother Derek Albert, who is the co-chair of the National um, Organization of Black County Officials, had asked me, he and Sister Tammy Sawyer, who is the General Sessions Clerk in Memphis, well, Shelby County, the entire
Yeah.
county, as we know. Um,
She was central in the was it Bedford, the taking down the Bedford statue and being
yes.
in the middle. I remember her very clearly, and she's part of what we do here. And
Yes, she is. Good
how
friends with Lamont. They know each other many years. He's DC kid as well, as now in the deep South. And the first thing was she said, "Well, y'all should come down here and do the show from down here." And when you tell me, and we know this now, you being years of our friendship, as we get closer, tell me where to be and when, and then I'm not gonna think about it until then, even as I'm never not thinking about it somewhere in my head. So I'm thinking about how is this going to tie. But then I don't logistics. People say, "Oh, you need an assistant, you need a staff." I'm like, yeah, that's how it works in other kind of struggles.
yeah,
But
yeah.
so
Wait, can we pause
ultimately,
there for a second? Because in that way, I've never had an assistant either. People are
hmm
surprised when I respond to an email that you sent with you come in with a certain and then it's like, oh, it's this cat. Yeah, no, it's me. You
it's
emailed me.
me.
It's not
You
nobody.
emailed me, right? You thought it was
Yeah,
gonna be an assistant, right?
correct. So that I love, but I also think it's a demonstration of like we both are absolutely in alignment with where we need to go. Like there's
Oh,
no
no question.
we move differently though, and I love it because I get to see myself, like the things about myself that I might want to change, and I'm looking at you, and I'm
Same
like, oh,
here. Same
you
with
know.
me.
So
Same
I just
here.
want to say thank you. I was like, this man will be there for everybody, and I'm like, no to everything. So
No,
I
no,
feel
but you're
promoted.
here. That's interesting you would say that because you're not too.
Yeah,
I mean, you're literally here every day. You know what I'm saying?
yes, but I ain't gonna be out in them streets. If you invite me some places,
Oh yeah, I got you.
I may even like I've RSVP'd to something recently, and then I was like,
I'm not going
yeah,
in.
why not do that? Why did I
Yeah,
do that?
yeah,
Like I'm
yeah.
like
No,
my
yeah.
yeah.
I don't take it. I don't take it. You know, it's interesting as you opened, well, not even open in the moment of conversation a moment ago when you talk about, how do you know when you come onto the planet or at some early age you're going to be in the work? For me, the answer is yes, in part because the circumstances required it. I didn't know when I enrolled at Tennessee State that I was going to be in that work of fighting these hillbillies who had uh, been in a war at that time by the early 1980s that had been about a 15-year war since the late 60s to destroy Tennessee State University in the name of integration because students from Tennessee State and in the state of Tennessee, Lucy Geyer, no, not Lucy, Rita Sanders Geyer, had filed a lawsuit. She was the named plaintiff to destroy the dual system of higher education in the state of Tennessee, which was, of course, a part of a larger strategy to destroy the dual system of higher education in the country, the dual system of education that we would call segregation or apartheid, not realizing that the white lash from that legally would be to destroy the black institutions in the name of desegregation. It's one thing for Arthur and Lucy to show up at the University of Alabama or Vivian Malone to show up or for Hamilton Holmes to show up at the University of Georgia. Um, it's one thing for them to show up there, and it's quite another thing for the response to be, we will let one or two of you in. James Meredith at the University of Mississippi, or who's the journalist I'm thinking about who was with Hamilton Holmes from Detroit. Yeah, I'll think about her in a minute. If I get quiet, I see her face.
Charlene, was it Charlene Hunter Gold?
Charlene Hunter Galt.
Okay,
Thank
I
you.
only know that because I just interviewed her a few months
Oh,
ago.
excellent. Beautiful
So
sister. And it's
yeah,
good to see you, you two
I didn't have
master
to look it
journalists
up.
in conversation.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
was
no, no,
like,
no. And
I
that's
know
just
that
me.
story.
That's
Thank you.
that's fatigue. I need to get my mind right. But at any rate, yeah, it's one thing for them, beautiful sister, of course. Um, it's one thing for them to show up one by one, Clarence Gaines at the University of Missouri X-Rail Gaines. It's one thing for them to show. Is then the white lash was okay. We'll spit on y'all. We'll curse you out. Eventually, 50 years from now, we'll give you a statue and an award and thank ourselves for being so beautiful. But in the meantime, we will eventually let you in. Maybe we'll expel you. Maybe we won't. But the price you will pay is we would then go to the black institutions and say you must integrate. And the black institutions response is we never discriminated. The only reason white people are not here is because you passed a law and said we couldn't go to school together. And then they realized that many of these these black schools are in state capitals in the South and have low tuition and have stupendous faculty and a remarkable level of education. And then they say, okay, and now we're going to wash you out and take out your president, your board, take out your faculty, turn into a white school and say, wait, no, hold on now. That was not what we were after. Well, it doesn't matter. And then you get the division in the black community because, and this I think is a class division because those who leaned heavily on the legal strategy would say, well, that's the price we have to pay. And then the rest of the black community is like hell, that ain't the price we wanted to pay. So I'm saying all that to say that I didn't know I was going to get caught up in that work when I came to Tennessee State as a first year
So when did
student.
you? So you're a freshman. You're 18. You're
Yeah,
in. You're hearing all this.
I came to be in the band.
Right. Theater major. You
Yeah,
gonna have
well,
plays
I
to be.
switched to theater. Yeah, after my
Okay.
first year, I was political science major because I didn't know what I was going to do. I know I wanted to be in the band. Then I got there and realized I don't have a GPA. By the way, high school students, when you graduate from high school and you go into college, you know what your GPA, your grade point average is at college? 0.0. Nobody asks your high school GPA when you come to college. So those of you who don't think that you're a good student, and every high school counselor that defecates on students and tell them they're not college material, you should resign your job today. And don't, because these kids, once they get in, you are now at zero. You do what you want. And that's what I realized. I said, okay, I like school enough and I like being here. I love all these black people. I love the band. So I'm gonna be a good student. And then I went out for a play and was like, oh, this is great. I get to do this too, because we had been in plays at church. I said, well, I might as well switch my major to theater. Yeah. But
Yeah.
politics wasn't
Okay.
in it.
So when did it happen? We had apartheid,
Yeah.
was on campus, and
Yeah.
our big thing at Drew was they had a rugby team and they had a slave sale. This is what they had a
Oh,
slave.
yes. Do
Okay.
you see, maybe young people maybe don't, people maybe in different regions don't remember that was a thing.
Yes, but here was the thing: they had a kid on the rugby team named Joe.
Oh,
Joe
Lord.
was a black boy,
Of
one of
course.
the black boy Joe, who they had on an auction block child.
Oh,
So that was the
oh.
thing that propelled our campus into action. Like, oh, what you not gonna do? But even then, I wasn't leading. You jumped in
But
as
you
a
were in the work though. That's when you got into work then, right?
yeah. I was personally offended. So my job was to roast Joe. Joe had a hard time.
Oh,
Oh,
that was your job. You were the
so
Joe
so
roaster.
so that I'm deputized myself because
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
built for bullying a little bit. But so I was like, oh, he's not gonna have a nice time here. Like, this is what your ancestors like.
Ooh,
I didn't let up on that child. I did not.
nicely done. Nicely
No,
done.
I don't know. I look back, Dr. Carr, and it's pretty
Oh, because
brutal.
you've lost track of Joe.
Oh, but look, I never cared. At that point, he was an avatar for you are
Yeah.
participating in our own. But
Yeah. Joe caught us straight. Joe's collateral
he,
damage. Sorry,
he,
Joe.
yeah, he didn't catch a stray, but he anyway. But for
He
you,
didn't catch us straight.
it was more than a stray. But for you coming into this, what you said, I'm going to get involved. Like, was there a moment
That's a
where you
great
like,
question. No, I was first in my family to go to college, and this is, I think, is true for all first generation students. First in my immediate family, my cousins and others are gone. This is a good lesson, I think. I'm glad you're asking this for everybody. We all have the capability to do what we want to do. Context is so important, the environment, who's going to help us, this kind of thing. And when you see a path open up to you, you can then, if you have the right people around you with the right encouragement and the right example and the right help, you can pursue it. And so this is what historically black colleges and universities mean to us, not just HBCUs, but I think exclusively black institutions when it comes to what I'm about to say. So on that campus, I'm looking around, I saw excellence from the moment I stepped into band practice and saw these master musicians like Ben Kirk, and Ed Graves, who were the directors of the band. And then I saw these master musicians who were my age and just a little older, seniors and juniors and sophomores, who were brilliant. And then I saw first year students like me, first time on a college campus, brilliant musicians, many of them much more talented than I was. And then I had an opportunity. And I seized that opportunity and I made that band. And I'm like, yeah, because I was a drum major in high school and I was a good musician. I'm not as good as some of these people. I'm better than some of these others. But now we're all together. And in that coming together, and these are all black people. You're talking about what, 200, 250 students? You realize, okay, this is possibility. School starts and you see black faculty, you see a black president, you see a black vice president of student affairs, Barbara Curry Merle, who is still, with us today, who was Wilma Rudolph's roommate coming out of Mississippi, and Wilma Rudolph coming out of Tennessee, and that my niece, Eden Fuller is going to North Carolina A&T. Her father is Ms. Merle's godson. And at Eden's graduation a couple of weeks ago, my now one of my mothers, Barbara Curry Merle, Ms. Merle, who was Wilma Rudolph's roommate, and who, when they were undergrads at Tennessee State, Tennessee A&I at that point, becoming Tennessee State Agricultural and Industrial State College, they had these bracelets made up kind of friendship bracelets of a sort. And for my niece's graduation, high school graduation, which she's getting ready to go run track for North Carolina A&T, Ms. Merle gave her from Rudolph's bracelet, one of those four bracelets they had made. And so the possibility. So when you come into a black environment, that's not just black people. First of all, it is black people, and then you start learning their stories, and you learn about Professor Kirk, who played with Stevie Wonder and traveled the world, and now he's in here with his trumpet. He said, "I'm gonna show you how I hit this note. Now y'all repeat after me. Now we're gonna play the blues." It's like, wow. I mean, and you realize it, and so you get to school, and you like, okay, this is what we're gonna do, and then you read a headline that says that they want this school to become 50% white by 1995. It's like, okay, no problem. There's the street. Let's go. And so that's when it works. Because what you're not going to do is
It's
balance your funky settler dream and what we experiencing right here on your backs. Because I know Tennessee hillbillies. I grew up with them, went to school with them. I was bused. I know them. I'm friends and was friends with many of them. Why? So it's not a question of them in terms of the children. It's a question of you funky hillbilly adults who these children will grow up and become if we don't do something about this right now. And so those things met for me in terms of leadership because, I get on campus and I see the people running for first year class because you know how that works. We both experienced that when you come in as a first year, a fresh woman or a fresh man, a fresh person, then, they don't have class officers yet. Everybody else had their elections the previous year. So we came in, I'm looking at the speeches and I'm looking at people giving speeches and, I'm like, okay, well, I could do what you're doing. That's not a problem. So that first year, I just kind of got involved in other things. Of course, that was the Jesse Jackson campaign of 1984. So we got involved in that in 83. Jesse Jackson ran for president. Oh, wow. And then went to the rally, saw Jesse, sat with Jesse and this guy. And then they said, okay, well, Jesse is cool, but Louis Farrakhan, who is Louis Farrakhan? Then you find out about Louis Farrakhan. All this stuff happens at school. It's like, okay. But by the spring, now they're going to run for sophomore office. And I've been here for a semester. And, I was like, okay, well, I'll run. And I was sophomore class president. And coming back in the fall, of my sophomore year, first semester of my sophomore year, that's when the desegregation the federal judge supervising the consent decree, the stipulation of settlement in the federal case, Thomas Wiseman, was a federal judge in New York, who was headquartered in Nashville, the state capital. That's when you see this decree that Tennessee State got to lose this non-racial its racial identity. The plaintiffs have come in, the interveners have come in, a bunch of disgruntled white faculty who had been when Tennessee State had merged with the University of Tennessee in Nashville, the first time in history of the United States that a HBCU took over a HWCU, and then they tenured all their HWCU faculty just before the merger so they could be irritants, many of them. And then they came in and were arguing that Tennessee State had a racial identity. You had one, you're white. No, we let everybody in. No, you don't. Yes, we do. Black, he says white people are not out here to the numbers. Anyway, long story short, we were disgusted. So we're in the state capitol. So we marched to the state capitol. And here I am, 19 years old, sophomore class president. So I'm supposed to be in the march. And as we marching, I'm going down there. We're in confrontation with the Tennessee State Legislature, with the governor of the state of Tennessee, and everybody else. And it's like, okay, yeah, this is our job. This is
did
what we
you
do.
did you feel this sense? Because
Yes,
I've been talking about this. Politicians are not our little friends; they're servants. They're public
that's right.
servants. They serve
That's
the
right.
people. We got to stop treating them like they're celebrities, and we can't put them on pedestals. They're there to do a job, and it's our responsibility. Our job is to elect people who are going to do the job.
That's
But
right.
but but you have to elect people who also feel a deep responsibility to do the job. So you felt I'm president, I have to do something. What was the strategy? What was it? Okay, so this is what they're gonna do. What was the strategy? Who built it? How did you implement it?
I think the political strategy was protest at that point because we didn't have a lot of details, and I wasn't well briefed. Again, I'm the sophomore class president, not the student body president. That would come a couple of years later as I grew into that into that understanding. The hell we had that we gave to elected officials, the most hell was we gave to the black elected officials, Tennessee Black Caucus, the black state representatives. Harold Love Jr. He's the leader now of the black state representatives organization in the United States. But at that point, Harold Love Jr. was a little boy. His father, Harold Love Sr., was in the Tennessee legislature. And the hell we gave Harold Love Sr. Yes, sir. But at any rate, the point is that we gave them all hell because we didn't know yet everything that was being balanced. And many of these folks had been civil rights leaders in the previous generation out in the street like we were, and then elected to office. We didn't see everything else. And then we eventually came to see the other things. I think about the the struggle between generations at a place like Tuskegee, talking to my friend Brian Jones, who wrote the book, The Tuskegee Student Movement. When Brian Jones says, when his father's generation arrived at Tuskegee in the 1960s and 70s, they were very confrontational with the previous generation that had been at Tuskegee, some of them since the 30s and 40s, and the Tuskegee Civic Association, Dr. Gamillion and all them. And he said, as you mature, you realize, well, that previous generation had fought a similar fight that you fought, and that's what made it possible for you to get here. And now your critique of them will change as the generation comes after you and critiques you for going too slow. And so, but at 19, you don't know all that. You grow into it. And, one of the great highlights of my life, as I've said before, is several years later as student body president on my way to law school by then. This is the spring of my last year at Tennessee State. I helped cut the ribbon on the renamed downtown campus of Tennessee State, that same white campus that had been taken over because of the legal fights of the 1960s. The man who cut that ribbon, who I helped cut that ribbon, Avon Williams, was a state senator from Knoxville and one of the few people in the Black Caucus in Tennessee that we didn't have heat for because he was known as the angriest black man in Tennessee and had been a crack lawyer. They had bombed the home of his senior law partner, Z. Alexander Luby, when they were pushing back, who lived across from Meharry and Fisk University there in North Nashville. And so he was a hero to us. The rest of them, to varying degrees, but many of them, we didn't know what they did. So we had the most smoke for the black legislators. And I'm saying all that as a prelude to this. The more I learned as I switched my major to theater, because I enjoyed and loved the theater, but as my political education continued, and then as a result, I decided, well, I'm going to law school because intellectual warfare is where the action is. We're going to fight these people tooth and nail in the courts. you know, it became a process of just, as you say, observing, being in the space, listening very carefully, being very keen about how the strategy would unfold, adapting the strategy to the context. So sometimes it was marches. We were in the state of Tennessee. By the time I got to be a junior, there was a gubernatorial election, 1986. Ned Ray McWhirter, a good old boy, one of the old Democrats, was running for governor, and I'll never forget, he reached out to us, the leadership student body of Tennessee State, because we had been in the papers all the time. We marching, we protesting, we're going to the Tennessee Higher Education Commission, we pushing back, we're talking with lawyers, what's the legal strategy, how can we help with this kind of thing. And McWhirter's office reached out and said, well, the candidate wants to meet with y'all. He was in the House of Representatives. I said, okay. So I went and met with Ned Ray McWhirter. What do you want? I said, well, I'd like y'all endorsement. I'll never forget, he was having a fundraiser. Me and him standing under a tree. He's dead now. He's been dead many years. I'm standing there with him, just a good old boy. When I'm standing here, what am I? 21-year-old kid, junior, about to be student body president. What do you want? I want your endorsement. I said, well, you want my endorsement. You want our endorsement. We don't endorse candidates, but what you gonna do for Tennessee State? He said, well, I got plans. We're gonna infuse y'all with millions of dollars, and we're gonna, yeah, all right, whatever. No, I'm serious. And he had a reputation for being a man of his word. So okay. So a few weeks later, we endorsed a governor candidate in the state of Tennessee. He won that election. Got a call. And now I'm in my office, student body president's office. Phone ring. Hello. The governor is on the line. Hello. Yeah. I want you to come down to my office. This is the same building we used to go down there and protest and surround it and be on TV and the police out there. I went up in the office, sat there. He said, I intend to make good on this promise. Okay. Ned Ray McWhirter. A couple of years later, my blood brother, was student body president. They took over the downtown campus and protested because it ain't going fast enough. Again, generations, not even within 2 years. Well, if you're in the campus of Tennessee State University today and you're in the student center, or you see some of these other buildings were built, when the ribbon was cut on the student center, one of the things I wasn't there, my father called me and said, the governor who got this appropriation stood there and said those carboys are one of the main reasons y'all got this building. I said,
Rob,
well,
I,
I
your,
believe that.
your mic is doing some crackling thing.
Is it? Is it? You
Yeah,
can't? Can you?
no, we can hear, but it's just like so we'll suffer through it. But
No, no, no. Hold on, hold on. Let me do it like
make
this. Let me do it. Let me do it
sure
like
that they're not because
Is that it? Is that better?
no, put them back in.
Oh, it's
But
not.
sometimes when they're not charged fully or something, I don't know. I don't use those.
no. I left these on the. I left these on the charger. I left them
Okay.
on the charger all day, so I don't know.
All right, we'll just
Oh man,
that's all
the
right. That's
devil
all
is a liar. They try to stop us today. Plus,
right.
it's
The devil,
raining
let me
here.
tell you, I was on a phone call today, very important one, and it kept dropping for no reason. I said, okay,
Hmm.
Starlink. I feel like yes. Okay, now it's stopped.
Starlink.
Yes, I
Well,
rebuke it.
yeah, they realize y'all should, if you want to surveil, you can't interfere. We know you're listening and we don't care because you're gonna lose. So as you die, just don't get in other people's way. Just die over there. But at any rate, yeah. So yeah, but yeah. So the process of knowing what to do, I think, requires focus, listening, patience, and participating. And in that spirit of generosity. And of course, then going off to law school, the trajectory changed again when I met John Clark right there in New York. And I decided I wanted to teach. I finished a law degree because I was clerking at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, as I've said many times, because my trajectory was to figure out how to fight in the courts to preserve Black institutions, not to destroy them. And for us, destroying Black institutions was the legal definition in a white supremacist legal framework of desegregation. In other words, desegregation was not about improving Black life, it was about figuring out how to extend the exploitation of Black people. So you do that by cherry picking the Negroes you want around you, the ball players and the valedictorians, and then taking the Black institutions and collapsing their budgets, cherry picking, taking away their best faculty, and figuring out a way to stigmatize them when in fact they had been the very institutions that had smashed your white supremacist plans in the previous generation. And so, 40 years, 40 years before there was a Justin Jones, 40 years before there was a Justin Pearson, who are now in that same legislature. We were down there protesting that exact same legislature with their predecessors. And so one of the things I've really been thinking about a lot here, particularly after spending that time in Birmingham. We walked into the first session and the mayor of Birmingham, Stephen Reed, good brother Stephen Reed, was talking about the concept of a universal basic income. Demir Montgomery, who we had seen a couple of months ago at the Fred Gray Symposium, and before that, a very interesting politician. He was actually he was in conversation in that opening session with Holly Mitchell, who's on the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors, holds a lot of power. There are, just as as many people here know, there are over 3,000 counties in the United States. So we think about the federal level, the senators, the representatives. We think about the state level, the governors, the legislatures. And then at the local level, we think about the mayors. But between the mayors and the representatives and the governors, are the county executives. And we know that one of the ways that white nationalism attempted to maintain its power was by expanding from the municipalities, from the cities, to encompass political power, particularly Black rising political power, by including the whole county. So now instead of Nashville, it's Nashville Davidson County. Instead of Memphis, it's Memphis Shelby County. Instead of Atlanta, it's Atlanta Fulton County. And that allowed them for a little time to interfere with Black political ambition. But then again, of course, Black people keep having babies. So then the counties start turning. So now you're talking about Chicago, Cook County, having a municipal budget of somewhere just north or south of $10 billion. You see what I'm saying? And who's running that? A black, uh, a black board in Cook County, Illinois. Got a chance to spend some time with Stanley Moore. We talked to him on Sirius. In fact, what we said was up and down the lineup. So I know there have been some of them who have talked many times with you or Clay, even Reese or Larry. We said this needs to be a regular, is it a monthly, is it a bi-weekly, or bi-monthly rather, conversation with membership of the National Organization of Black County Officials, because as Stephen Reed, a point he made some time ago, I saw him, and he was saying, it's the Black county officials in the United States of America who have control of not a billion, not 5 or 10 billion, but tens of billions of dollars in direct public support. So when you start talking about your light, your power, your job, you start talking about services. And yes, it's the senator, yes, it's Jasmine Crockett, and yes, Donald Trump's, but it's the county officials for so many people who have this work. Loretta Smith out of Portland, it's very interesting to have this conversation. And of course, Tammy Sawyer, as an activist, as you say, take that bus down in Nashville of Nathaniel Bedford Forrest. That was there when we invaded damn legislature, when we marched. The founder of the Ku Klux Klan, former Confederate soldier, absolutely was there. But guess what? Tammy Sawyer is now in West Tennessee, and she is the general sessions clerk in Shelby County. That is an extremely powerful position, an elected position. And so, for people who talk about the failure of Black electoral politics, I'm exactly with you, but I also understand that I live in the world. And would you rather have a white supremacist in those seats, or would you rather have somebody, particularly those who come out of an activist tradition, who are there? And if you want to criticize them, it shows to me a sense of political immaturity, but it also shows that you aren't directly engaged. Because if all you're going to do is sit and criticize, we're going to fight for you too. But what we're not going to do is listen to your dead end strategies, because history shows us that they are dead ends, even as history shows us that there's a need for protest, even as there's a need for litigation. So, you know, the theme of the NOBCO convening this year is the urgency of now: Black leadership, civil rights, and economic power. Now, that's not unusual. You see these themes all the time. People are talking about these themes every time we're out here in these streets. A couple of years ago it was the National Association of Black Social Workers. Next week we're going to be talking about political organizing. There's always a beautiful theme. And, in talking with Tammy and then talking with Derek, Derek is like, something has been on my mind for a very long time. Derek's out of Detroit. He's the co-chair of NOBCO, has been involved for many years with so many different municipal formations. He said, I've been thinking a lot about gaslighting. Like, gaslighting, bro? Yeah. You know, gaslighting. We get gaslit a lot. And so he said, if you can make it, because again, I'm trying to just tell me where to be and when, and then we try to figure that out. And so, okay, well, last minute, so I can get down there. I'll get down there. I'll be down there. Because my auntie Lillian West made transition. My father's sister, so I'll be in Nashville for a couple of days, then back here for the convening in Atlanta. So I said, yeah, I need to spend some time in the South anyway, and this is like a mini moment of me wanting to do that every summer anyway, to be in community with people. So yeah, I'll be there. He said, well, give me a sense of how you might approach that. So I came up with a theme: gaslighting by government, or governing by gaslighting, because these are elected officials. You're governing, but you're governing by gaslit lighting. Of course, gaslighting is the whole notion of people saying something to you that eventually makes you think you crazy. You're being gaslit. And so, of course, me, I'm looking at the definitions, I'm looking at what it means to be gaslit. And so, you know, the idea that to manipulate a person by psychological means into questioning her or his sanity. It's psychological warfare. It's gaslighting. And of course, I think there's a film out of the 40s, although the Oxford English Dictionary would attribute a test that first used to the early 1960s, with a previous use that was attested to as well in the 1950s. But, this movie where this husband and wife are together, and the husband wants to get rid of the wife. So the husband starts doing things to make the wife think she's crazy, leaving stuff on, or switching the light off, or leaving a cup out. And so what you're doing is creating a situation where the person you're doing it to stops trusting their own sanity. And so we had a fascinating conversation yesterday morning about this question of gaslighting and the disconnect between policy and the community. We often talk about these Black elected officials ain't doing nothing, nothing changed in my neighborhood. Okay, everybody calm down. What's your evidence? Because I called up there, or I don't even know. I just know that every time I look at the street. Okay, so you haven't really thought about it. Are you being gaslit? And so it was very interesting. We had a conversation yesterday morning after Mayor Reed and Sister Mitchell, Commissioner Mitchell finished, Supervisor Mitchell finished, and then we broke out into this conversation around this, and with Tammy and myself and Loretta Smith, as I said, from Portland, and Derek, Elliot Boyce, who spent 35 years on the New York State Police, which was very interesting because much of the conversation turned to the question of policing, which I thought was fascinating because, this is a real issue for us. And then, afterwards, Stan Moore, as I said, from Cook County, commissioner there, Ray Charles Brooks, who's the chair of NOPCO, Derek's the co-chair. We continued this conversation and it just resonated. And it was fascinating because after Elliot spoke about policing, remember, he's New York State Police, which means, Eric Garner, Tammy brought up Eric Garner. He said, let me tell you all about this and how they do us. And he started talking about these menthol settlements and how we're gaslit into believing that, the ways that we move are the ways that we have to move because we don't have any other ways. And how within police forces, the idea is that this is the image of police. And when you have police who want to act differently, especially Black police, they are gaslit into thinking that they can't behave any differently. And so they internalize this stuff. And then you're out in the street. And then, of course, Tammy started talking about what happened to Tyree Nichols and these 5 guys, many of whom were in Divine Nine organizations and part of the community, who start acting like a gang because that's the gang culture of the damn police. And it's so funny because when Derek introduced Elliot, he said, I don't want to cuss, but I don't. And you can imagine what came next. And I think we almost all said the F word in our minds. I don't F with the police. Right. But this dude I F's with. And we all started laughing. But the point was that, before you put on a uniform, before you take a political office, you are a human being. And if you're a person of African descent, that should come with a certain level of awareness, particularly if you're in an official capacity. And so you talk about governing from gaslight, governing by gaslight. You're talking about grappling with the fact that you're coming into a space where people have assumptions about you, not assumptions on all ends of the spectrum, on both ends of the spectrum. On one end of the spectrum, they see you're Black, they're Black, and they say, okay, we expect you to do something for us. On the other end of the spectrum, you're an elected official or you're a cop, and so therefore I don't expect anything from you. The cognitive dissonance is a form of gaslighting because now you've trapped yourself with your expectations. So those of us like you, those of us like me, those of us like people who will get involved in the political arena to try to improve the conditions of African people, but will not themselves run for elected office, but who call themselves like a Joe Madison, who's an activist, as he writes in his memoir, Radioactive, who comes into a broadcast space to give platform to people to become aware and inform themselves, but at the same time never leaves being an activist. So the question is, what you going to do about it? And I'm gonna hold people accountable. All that is converging in a place where ultimately the question Sonia Sanchez asked, oh yeah, but how do it free us? While it's never lost, it can get consumed by this gaslight that is going on consistently in our community. And so what I talked about a little bit yesterday was, the gaslighting for African people begins with the boats. The African experience in the Western Hemisphere, in the modern world, but specifically in the United States, that is a form of gaslighting. It took gaslighting to get us on the boat, as Michael Gomez writes in Exchanging Our Country Marks, his book, Exchanging Our Country Marks, interviewing that last generation of Africans who went through captivity in this country. The whole idea of being in a space where they lure you into captivity, they being Black people, by, red cloth or shiny objects or whatever, tricking you, you being gaslit into a boat. Now you over here. And they start gaslighting you by saying, you're not human. You're savage, you're slave. What you say is divine is in fact heathen. Our God is the only God, and your God is the devil. Now you've been gaslit for real. And watch this. Now we're gonna say, but you have a chance to be human. Come over here, repeat after me. Yes, Jesus Christ. Huh? Jesus Christ. Okay, now you can be free. Not in this life, but in the next life. Okay. Oh, Jesus Christ. Gaslit. You've been gaslit. You know what I'm saying? So it is the perpetual gaslighting that we find ourselves in that we have to push back against. It's a difficult thing to do. And so, what I thought we would do for a few minutes today is kind of explore maybe this concept of governance by gaslight. Because the second part of what I talked about yesterday was the question of how we have Black politics in the world at the end of empire. because that's where we are. We're at the end of the U.S. empire. We got news this week from Atlanta that the great Ngugi wa Thiong'o became an ancestor at the age of 87. His daughter first reported it, and then his son and some others made some comments. He's birthed a few writers in his bloodline, and Ngugi is one of the great thinkers, as we've talked about many times. This is his last book, which was published just a couple of weeks ago. It's called, let me see here, Decolonizing Language and Other Revolutionary Ideas. There's Ngugi wa Thiong'o, the great Ngugi. This is, I guess, a picture of him. There he is right there, Ngugi, Professor Ngugi. Had a chance to spend some time with Ngugi one time at Howard University 10 years ago, 10, 11 years ago, now 2014, picked his book, Something Torn and New, which I still teach at Howard, in which we use in the Introduction to Africana Studies course here in Nubia. Had a chance to pick it for our freshman seminar. And so we had about 1,000 first year students at Howard read it, and reached out to Prof. Ngugi. And at the time he was in New York. And so he took the train down and spent the day with us, with the students. And was a remarkable moment. Gave a lecture, and afterwards we all sat around and ate and had fellowship, and we put him back on the train to the city. But Ngugi is a remarkable, just a beautiful human being. In fact, the young lady who was a first year student that year, who moderated the luncheon we had for him as a break between the student sessions and then his talk, Shanice Thompson, is now a professor in our Department of African American Studies. That was the second time she had read Ngugi's book, because first time she read it, I put it in her hand when she was 16, Philadelphia Freedom Schools, because I had picked that book. And Ngugi is a very important figure. But I raise him because Ngugi talks in this book, his last book, about the importance of language. In fact, let me see here. Yeah, New York Times today, day late, couple of dollars short, not on the front page, should have been. There he is. This is Ngugi here. Ngugi wa Thiong'o is dead at 87. It says, condemned colonialists and elites. Yes, he did. Spent time in jail in Kenya. Ngugi wa Thiong'o, this is Alan Cowell writing in the New York Times today. Ngugi wa Thiong'o, a groundbreaking novelist, playwright, and memoirist whose writings explored the iniquities and ambiguities of colonialism in his native Kenya, as much as the misdoings of the post-colonial elite, and who led a passionate campaign for African authors to eschew the languages of foreign occupiers, died on Wednesday in Beaufort, Georgia. He was 87. Every year they said he should get the Nobel Prize, and every year he wouldn't. In fact, they used to camp out at his house. He was a professor out in California for many years. And he said one of those years, after he didn't get it, he said, I had invited the reporters into the house and gave them something to eat and fed them some drinks. And he said, I had to console them because they mad now every year. So eventually he just said, I don't care. Now watch this. The Nobel will now give Ngugi wa Thiong'o the Literature Prize to honor itself now that he is gone. Ngugi wrote, he spent a stretch of his career, including up to now, writing in Gikuyu, his first language, his national language, Kikuyu. And then if you wanted to translate it into French or English or Spanish or Dutch or Portuguese or any of the European languages, he was fine with that. In fact, he did the translations into English himself. But he said, I'm not going to write in your language first. He was known as James Ngugi when he burst on the scene. And then he said, no, Ngugi wa Thiong'o. He wrote one of his books on toilet paper, because they had him in jail. Here, in fact, they got a picture of Devil on the Cross, which was a critique of the bourgeois colonial elite, the blacks who came out of independence, came out of colonial fight in Kenya, and then started being a predator class. You see one of his friends and colleagues who still walks the earth with us, Ikwe Arma, writing in The Beautiful Ones Are Not Yet Born, but Devil on the Cross, Ngugi was in jail. Them same Kenyan Negroes put him in jail as a dissident for what he was saying, for speaking out. He wrote Devil on the Cross literally on pieces of toilet paper in his prison cell and smuggled them out. A whole novel, just in Ngugi wa Thiong'o. And I'm saying that because Ngugi had smoke for colonialism. He said, this is what got us in this mess. He said, but let me be very clear about that. We can get out of this mess, but the first thing it's going to take is a revolution of the mind. That's why his book, Decolonizing the Mind, was so important. That's why his book, Something Torn and New, was important. That's why we read it in our Africana Studies formation. And that's why here in this new book, his last book, While He Walks the Earth, this book here, Decolonizing Language, he has a chapter called Decolonizing Language. And he says this about culture. This is essential to what we're trying to do here, what we're doing. He says, culture is to a community what a flower is to a plant. A flower is very beautiful, very colorful, often very delicate, but it often readily defines the identity of the plant. Most important, the flower yields the seeds that make the reproduction of the roots and trunks of that plant possible. Kill the tree trunk and even the roots, but retain the seeds, and the tree can reproduce itself. If you can, I mean, it can, if you like, reimagine itself. Language, the carrier of culture, is the ultimate and primary means of individual and collective self imagination. And Ngugi writes, empire builders have always known that. And in shaping how the dominated imagined their future, they clearly saw the importance of delinking the elites of the dominated communities from their language and literally transplanting their minds in the languages of the imperial centers. So London, Antwerp, Paris, put that language, French, English, Spanish, into the minds and the tongues of the elites that you are cultivating through education to manage the rest of them people you colonizing and get out of the way. They'll fight each other. Them Negroes will say, I went to school in Ghana, but to go to school, you got to go to London. Them Negroes in Senegal will say, I went to school in Senegal. I was in the school in Dakar, but to go to school, you must go to the Collège de France in Paris and sip some demi-tasse at the, and learn the refined ways. In other words, these Googies, you take their memory from them. It's a critical point in Ngugi is making here. And I think about that in the context of where we are now. That's why when he wrote Something Torn and New, he says, whatever we become next is not going to be what we were. It's something torn, but it's going to be something new based on what we were. But first of all, we got to get that colonizer concept out of our mind. Language is very important. He said this, he wrote this in the first essay in the book. What's the first essay? I was reading it on the plane. It'll come in a second. Decolonizing education. It's very, in fact, what I was quoting for him there is actually the book called the essay called The Magic Fountain. Part one of the book's called Decolonizing Language. The first essay is called Decolonizing Education. And in that essay, what Ngugi says is, he says, it would be like going to France and telling the French writers, you must write in Zulu. What do you mean? I'm French. Yes, you are French, but to communicate to the world, you got to write in Zulu. No, I'm gonna write in French. And if they want to translate into Zulu, I hope they will. In fact, I'll help them if I know Zulu, no problem. So then why would you come to any place in Africa and tell them they got to write in English? They got to write in French to have a global community. And then I thought about that as an African here, for whom English is a first language alongside African American English, which is Ebonics, of course. And I thought, think about James Baldwin or Ta-Nehisi Coates. Think about Toni Morrison or Maya Angelou. Think about Langston Hughes or Sterling Brown, Alice Walker, Sonia Sanchez. How we communicate with each other as Africans, despite the fact that the language we use is a commingling of all the languages we brought with us that got mashed into these various ebonics, that we then have to figure out a way through idiom, through when we hear spoken dimensions of it, through the phonology. We have to figure out a way to communicate, despite the fact that the colonial tongue has been stuffed into our mouths and in our minds, so that even at our greatest, just like people waited forever for this man to get a Nobel as if that's going to give him some kind of imprimatur. No. Think about it in terms of our continuing challenge. Are we thinking by gaslight? Because you're gaslighting us, meaning what? We now will say it ourselves. I understand all that, but you don't need to talk about that because you're not refined. You're not educated. Where did you go to school? Okay, you went to an HBCU. Did you go to Howard? No, I didn't go to Howard. That's not good. No, I went to Howard. But did you go to Harvard? No, because it's all going to retreat to the mean of the gaslit concept that whatever you do is not good enough. You've got to have some white reference. Calling Howard to Black Harvard is a joke. You can't do that. Or maybe you can because you're experiencing gaslight. Even in Birmingham yesterday, I picked up a copy of the Birmingham Times. This is the Birmingham Times. This brother right here, you see, Keeping the Faith. This is a Catholic priest. This is the good brother Brent Patterson, who's the acolyte lector at Our Lady of Fatima Catholic Church in Birmingham. The narrative, Keeping the Faith, this article is about what Pope Leo XIV means to Black Catholics. It's a complicated, this is a Black newspaper, by the way, in Birmingham, the Birmingham Times. The the idea is our spirituality now. Imagine if he said, I'm an African, I'm gonna take off the Catholic Church and I'm gonna practice voodoo. Oh, no, you can't do that. Candomblé, Santeria, Ifa. I'm gonna, Macumba. I'm gonna do, wait a minute, hold on. And Ngugi is like, you know why he ain't gonna do that? Because you have cultivated in his mind that those ways of knowing are not the equal to or different than or better than the ones that you have stuffed into his ancestors' minds. So what do you see? You see an African robed differently, talking differently, the liturgical language of the Catholic Church, Latin. Now you've got that language, that culture in your mind. But guess what? Deep in his spirit and in his cultural practice day to day, there is a flower that has a seed in it. You can cut the roots, you can cut everything, but if you've got those seeds and those seeds are there. So for Ngugi, remembering, that's when we say remembering, that's what we're talking about. So even like I said, sitting there with Naco and being in this conversation and talking about gaslighting and governing by gaslight, I thought what we would do this weekend for a few minutes is talk about governance by gaslight. Because we're not talking about elected officials. If elected officials of African descent are part of the African community, we're talking about governance formations, not who these elected officials are to the formations they find themselves in through election, which is extremely important. As I said, I don't know that there's a more important convening than the county officials to come together and talk. I think that's very interesting. So we talked about best practices, how the HBCUs should be helping. We got all these law schools, all these medical schools. They should be support teams to generate our version of policy making. When y'all come together and talk, let these graduate students, let these undergraduate students transcribe, put together. Certainly Narrative and Nubia can help in that to facilitate that kind of connecting, to create a space where, we talk about ALEC, we got enough to do our own versions that are better than that. When Mayor Reed was talking about universal basic income and he said in Birmingham, Randall Wolfen, he said, my friend Randall Wolfen here in Birmingham got through the council, and the council, they came through with a minimum wage hike. And then them people in Alabama, in Montgomery, the state capital, the state legislature, the supermajority Republican state legislature passed a law that said no city can make. So no city can make a law without our permission on that question. Yeah, because they're trying to take the power away. They're always trying to do that. Well, guess what? My legislation, we can hit them from 1,000 different ways. We have the capacity to do it. We just got to coordinate. We just got to come together. But in that question of governance by gaslight, governance formation is who we are to each other. And if we talk about who we are to each other, then we can certainly coordinate in a way that comes solely from our interests and give us a sophisticated way in terms of strategy and planning for dealing with these external forces that threaten to overwhelm us by gaslighting us into believe that we don't have the political power. I'll say one or two other things about that, and then I want to kind of get to the meat of what I want to talk about today, which is a very important moment we spent in Birmingham yesterday and what it teaches us about governance at the end of empire and governance by gaslight here at the end of empire. In the conversation we were having, a brother mentioned something. He's from the Virgin Islands. I talked about this on the radio, so I won't talk much more about it. I just want to bring it up. He was like, he talked about policing again in the Virgin Islands, U.S. Virgin Islands. He said, I understand when he referred to us as former captives and, talk about human trafficking, which is why I'm trying to get away from the concept of slavery, the word slavery, again, language being important. He said, but, slavery is a form of human trafficking that is the worst. And so how do we not lose that sense? And I said, why do we hold on to the language of our trauma as the thing that we are defined by? That's a form of gaslighting in my mind. So the slaves, you been gaslit. You took that word slave and made it your identity. Why do you love that trauma so much? What about that trauma makes you feel like you are the subject? Slave. Oh, that's me. Now, and then say, now out of that slavery, we created great music, we created great food, we created great thinking and philosophy. Yeah, but no, you did that because you're a human, not because you were a slave. The traumatic experience may have brought something out from you with you, but as Delroy Lindo told young Miles in Sinners, and they're enjoying the Sinners weekend, aren't they? It's a beautiful thing down there in Mississippi. Met a couple of people actually yesterday from Clarksdale who was like, "Yeah, man, they down here with us." I said, "Okay, that's beautiful." But as he told him just before he started singing that song, "I lied to you," he said, the blues ain't nothing that came from that book, from that religion they call themselves giving us. We brought the blues from home. Oh yeah, man. I love that. We brought the blues from home. And so, we talked about that. But you know, what I said to him was, we have to use different language because we got to recover our memory. And when we do that, the work that we do will be so much easier. It's not going to make our battles anymore any less difficult. But what it will do is fortify us to understand that we stand in the subject position. And not only are we enough, we have always been enough to intervene in inequities in the world. And so I'm sure there are going to be more conversations about that. But after we left, it was interesting. I was thinking, I wish I could have gone to Carsdale. The State of the People Power Tour, I think, is in Jackson this weekend. They're going around the country. Angela Rye, Tiffany Cross, and them are going around. Important work because everybody trying to do something in this moment. Very important. But I got a chance to go to just a quick tour. Went by the Arthur George Gaston complex. Oh, Prof, have you ever been to the AC Gaston Motel in Birmingham? I don't know if you've been to Birmingham. I don't know if you've been to
I
Birmingham.
have I have not.
Okay, we
I've
got to
not.
put that. We're gonna put that on the. Every time I go a place, I'm like, this place got to be the relationship between. Well, Alabama already. We talked about that year before last when we were at Tuskegee, and then at Montgomery that morning, out there at the museum having this conversation. Montgomery and voting rights very important. The relationship between Montgomery and Birmingham very important. That relationship reveals the battleground that has framed much of the last almost 3 generations of struggle among human beings here in what we call the United States of America. A.C. Gaston is a fascinating figure. Probably most people know the name, the A.C. Gaston Motel. So imagine this. Here is the A.C. Gaston Motel and Restaurant. Next to the A.C. Gaston Motel and Restaurant is a building that is the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute. The Birmingham Civil Rights Institute sits in a space that is intersected by a street. So you got the Gaston Motel and Restaurant. You've got the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute literally right there, brick to brick with it. The yard that the Civil Rights Institute, when you walk out the door, you walk in that yard, that's Kelly Ingram Park. Then there's a street, you cross the street, that continues Kelly Ingram Park. Across the next street is 16th Street Baptist Church. Now, the place where 4 young girls were bombed in September 1963 is right there. The park where Bull Connor and them shot the fire hoses on those kids is right there and across the street. And AC Gaston's Motel and restaurant is right there. Across the street, on the other side of the street from AC Gaston's Motel, is AC Gaston's business building, a pharmacy, and other buildings down the street. Arthur Soares, his friend, where he had his law practice. You go down the street is the Negro Southern League Museum, Birmingham. This is one of the blackest places in the United States of America. And A.C. Gaston not only owned the block, he owned most of the stuff on the other side of the block. A.C. Gaston, at the time that he made transition, at the age of 103, in 1996, A.C. Gaston, the estimate was that he had accumulated a net worth of somewhere around $140 million. A.C. Gaston was born in 1892. A.G. Gaston, Arthur George Gaston, Sr. His grandparents had come through captivity in Alabama. He was born in a place called Demopolis, Alabama. This is a place that the Indian killer, so-called Indian killer Andrew Jackson, had been fighting against the indigenous people before he rose to elective office in the United States of America and became the head of what became the Democratic Party. So our Trail of Tears, he was practicing that stuff in the 18 teens. Demopolis was a place that the criminal enterprise called the United States federal government gave to the French for some quote unquote nobility that were freeing France after the French Revolution. And they called it Demopolis, city of the people, place of the people, demos, of course, that's where you get the notion of people. That's why you say demographers. Polis, of course, as we know from the Introduction to Africana Studies class, when we started talking about the social structure category, we read the book, we had part of the book, John Ma's book, Polis, the concept out of Greece, the place of the people, the city of the people, Demopolis. Coming out of captivity, his grandparents worked hard, acquired some land. His own parents, his mother, had him and then left looking to the big city to try to get work. Father, same thing, worked on the railroad. So he's raised by his grandparents. A.G. Gaston. A.G. Gaston. Well, before I get to A.G. Gaston, shout out to the sisters of National Park Service, the rangers who were working there as we went to the motel, toured the motel. Shout out to Sister Naima Elmore and her business partner, Brother Rashad Harrell, Rock Harrell, who have a coffee shop in what used to be the expansive uh, restaurant slash ballroom run by Arthur G. Gaston. Um, Understand, oh, by the way, there's a book called Black Titan. Black Titan was written by the niece, A.G. Gaston's niece, his wife's sister's daughter, and his wife's sister's granddaughter, her great niece. And the book Black Titan is well worth the read. It's about 350 pages. It is an incredible reading of not only the history of Arthur George Gaston, but the history of African struggle in the 20th century. Again, the man lived to be 103. I won't even go through all of his accomplishments because it wouldn't be possible, but I want to mention a few. Gaston started over 10 businesses in his life. He started with his father-in-law, his childhood sweetheart. Well, he met her as a child, met her again as an adult. Gaston was a war hero in World War One. He worked in, he fought in the European theater of operation. In fact, he fought in battles in, I think it was the 317th Ammunition Corps, which is interesting because we talk about the 369th, the Harlem Hellfighters. A.G. Gaston fought in the 317th, resupplying in ammunition. He fought in places like Metz, France. Now I got to go do the research because my mama was married. Her first husband was in Metz, France, the U.S. military in World War II. And it makes me think, wait a minute, Metz must be where Metz, METZ, is where they put black soldiers. But at any rate, Asa Gaston came back, married his childhood sweetheart, the woman he knew as a child. Her father was a businessman in Meridian, Mississippi. They go into business together. A.G. Gaston started in his businesses when he was working in the iron factories, the mills in Alabama, near Birmingham, where Willie Mays grew up. But anyway, Gaston, well, actually, no, he started his businesses in at his grandparents' house. They had a tree with a swing in it in the yard. As a little boy, he would charge the neighborhood kids a button to come in and swing on the swing. This Arthur George Gaston. This the first decade of the 20th century. Talking about the 19 aughts, like 1910, 1909, 8, 7, born 1892. Actually, I guess late 1890s. Mr. Gaston said that he got so many buttons from children that wanted to be on that swing. Black children in the neighborhood. He said the kids was going in their parents' house, taking buttons off clothes. So he was making buttons, not money. The whole concept was, and he wrote this in his memoir. He says, if you want to make money, it's easy. Just follow the plan. You'll make all the money you want. He says, find a need and supply it. You need to swing on this swing. I need a button. So he's a little boy. He knew how to do that. So he's working in the mills with these brothers. He starts loaning them little bits of money. That turns into, with his father-in-law, an insurance business. Actually, the insurance business, they started selling burial insurance because you ain't gonna bury black people. So you know what they did next, Prof? They started a funeral home, a funeral service, the Booker T. Washington funeral service, because he went to a Black school as a child, founded by a Black woman who taught them the value of self-determination and independence. She was one of the lieutenants of Booker T. Washington who used to come to the school and talk to them when Mr. Gaston was a little boy. So Gaston is learning self-determination in Alabama from a man who is regularly regaled, Booker T. Washington, and the philosophy of Black conservatism that is regularly regaled by Black conservatives now, who say things like, we can't come together to buy our way out of captivity or buy our way out of oppression. That's true. We can't. Oh, but we can leverage our resources. And if you want to keep talking that kind of, I would say, immature ideological talk, which has a kind of ideological rigidity and impurity, I suggest you spend some time around Black people. I'm not talking about, just Black intellectuals. I'm talking about spend some time with some Black people. Get out in the streets and maybe even recover the memory. Take some of these seeds and these flowers of our culture, like the story of Arthur Gaston. So at any rate, Mr. Gaston then goes from funeral homes. They become a big funeral home. They become the biggest Black funeral home in the South, the Booker T. Washington Funeral Home. His first wife makes transition. His second wife, with whom he was with when he made transition at age 103, and she made transition in the year 2000. His second wife, Miss Minnie, who was the auntie of the author and the grand aunt of the co-author of the book Black Titan on A.G. Gaston, even though Arthur George Gaston wrote his own memoir about his life, in part to refute the challenge by generations of Black leaders that he was an Uncle Tom. We're coming to that. Governance by gaslight. I'm got my eye on the clock. Gaston's a fascinating figure because his second wife, he marries her. By now, he's pretty well off. In fact, he buys a mansion. He and his father-in-law, his first wife's father, he helps him get the money. He buys a mansion in Kelly Ingram Park, which is segregated. Used to be owned by a coal baron, white coal baron. You can see 16th Street Baptist Church because it's right there where it's now across the street from where it is. Gaston buys the biggest house in Birmingham, one of them, and moves in. $50,000 loan he gets from the white bank, who also has insurance policy and funeral home interest, because they think that when they default on the loan, they're gonna take over his insurance company and his funeral home. If not take it over, they're going to force him into business because they want those Black bodies and they want those Black pennies. Gaston is like, oh no, I'm not going to forfeit. So he convinces his first wife's father-in-law to help him get the loan. His first wife's father is in Mississippi. He kind of wants the old man to come to Alabama and come with him. They're in Fairfield, Alabama first, then they move to Birmingham. He's like, nah, I ain't gonna do that. In part because he done built up his reputation in Mississippi. He's not coming. Now, these are Black people, okay? These are Black people. People say, well, we can't do nothing. Part of this is recovering our memory. What Ngugi is talking about in terms of remembering when it comes to language, and beyond that, culture, and beyond that, what you have done. What did you say on the shirts as we were campaigning for Garvey to get that pardon? What people have done, people can do. Get up and do. So I'm gonna fast forward this because I encourage everyone to read Black Titan. It's well worth it for some reasons that'll become evident in a couple of minutes when I get to them. Gaston is rich. His first wife's father makes transition, then his first wife makes transition, then his second wife, who knew his first wife and knew his first wife's father, who was a student from Tuskegee, who got a job after Tuskegee, I think in Atlanta, and then his first wife, who never recovers from the death of her father, even as her own health is failing. Really gets real close to the second wife, the woman who becomes Miss Minnie, the second wife. There's nothing romantic between Gaston and the second at that time, and the lady who becomes his second wife. But after his first wife passes, after a couple of years, he marries this woman who had known his first wife, has known his first wife's father, and they take off to another level. 7 or 8 more businesses come. He buys the block. The man builds this big building, which is still there, the AC Gaston headquarters. Across the street, he builds a motel because black people don't have no decent motel. You know who spent their wedding night there? A young lady who had grown up in Birmingham. Her father was the principal of the segregated school, and she married this young brother named Colin Powell. Colin and Alma Powell spent their wedding honeymoon night at the Gaston Motel. When Fred Shuttlesworth really escalated the fight. And I flew into Fred Shuttlesworth International Airport. It's quite something to fly into air. I love flying to airports with black people's names on them. Louis Armstrong in New Orleans, Fred Shuttlesworth in Birmingham. Of course, in Jackson, Mississippi, Medgar Wiley Evers, the 100th anniversary of his birth is coming up soon, fast upon us. It's a beautiful thing, flying out of Thurgood Marshall in Washington, D.C. But when Shuttlesworth and them start what eventually becomes Operation C for confrontation, YT Walker and them, AC Gaston's like, hold on, man, I've been working on these white elected officials in Birmingham. I hold a lot of weight. I'm a millionaire. I hold a lot of weight. So I want our people to be free too, but I'm going through it this way. I'm raising this money. It was almost like a Booker T. Washington philosophy on steroids because this guy was rich. He had all these institutions that he had created, many of them because apartheid gave him the business opportunity, unfortunately. So when this next generation comes and Shuttlesworth for them, he said, man, nah, don't go about it that way. A.G. Gaston had been talking with, among others, Bull Connor, with the mayor. He backed a more conservative mayor in one election, and then the guy lost because Gaston, after a first round of elections, switched side to the other guy who was more progressive. It was on the question of segregating the schools and whether they're going to keep them segregated. Gaston ends up on the right side, but he's very tactical, very methodical in his approach. So here comes this next generation. These guys are in their 20s and 30s, these women and men. So Shuttlesworth is coming, and Gaston is like, yeah, no, I don't know about that. Then here come Martin Luther King from Atlanta, which is makes him an outsider, right? Even though he had been in Montgomery before that. And so Mr. Gaston is like, I don't know. So what happens? Gaston, who has been supportive of civil rights and liberation struggles because he is the man with all the money, Arthurine Lucy, who integrated the University of Alabama. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me name one of the other businesses. Gaston's businesses are so successful that he runs out of people. He's running out of people to employ to run his businesses because he's employing black people. What does Mr. Gaston do? Gaston starts a Booker T. Washington school to train what ends up being thousands of people, ranked people in the trades, top ranked people, particularly in clerical work and administrative work, black women, thousands by the thousands. When the war jumps off, A.G. Gaston, I'm sorry, as he's doing it, he turns to his wife, Minnie, his second wife, said, why don't you run the school? She said, I got that. Mrs. Bethune, Mary McLeod Bethune, looked at Miss Minnie Gaston and said, she is a model for the rest of us. She trained so many people, particularly black women, when the war jumped off and they needed secretaries and labor for the war effort. Man, hundreds of graduates of the Booker T. Washington School went into service for the federal government. Just what they doing. All right, now, let me go back. That's one of the businesses, right? So, Mr. Gaston, when King and them show up, Gaston is like, okay, well, I can't stop this, so let me figure out what I'm going to do. They offer, and we stood in front of Suite 30, which is at the Gaston Motel, the second floor of the Gaston Motel. That's where Martin Luther King and Wyatt T. Walker and all them, Andrew Young, that's where they planned the Birmingham movement in Mr. Gaston's hotel. Even as Gaston politically is on the other side, they beefing in the black press. Gaston's like, this ain't the way to do it. And then they come out, the King and them and Abernathy and them come out against Gaston saying the guy's moving too slow. We don't agree. It's got to be. So politically, they are different. He will be considered a conservative or even an Uncle Tom by certain generations, but they stand at his place. When Arthurine Lucy integrates the University of Alabama, he shows up in Tuscaloosa and gets out of the car. One of the cars owned by A.G. Gaston Insurance Company, funeral home. They send the cars to Alabama. She's in the car. When they let her in finally, and then they put her out after a couple of days, we talked about Arthur and Lucy. Go to the compendium. You can see when we talked extensively about Ms. Lucy. Guess what? Gaston is like, I'm sorry, Miss Minnie Gaston is like, until they put you back in school, you go to the Booker T. Washington School and get these skills so you can earn it. And so they pay her a wage at the Booker T. Washington School and then employ her in the Gaston businesses while they battling the University of Alabama. Please understand governance, who we are to each other, The politics get described very differently. You read Carry Me Home, one of the biographies of the era, they call him a moderate, a slow-going Negro leader. You don't know nothing about our people. It's very complex. A.G. Gaston, King gets arrested. This is the arrest that led to him writing what we know as the letter from the Birmingham jail. You know who paid his bail and the bail of many others who got arrested to the tune of around $150,000? We talking about the 1960s, early 60s. It was A.G. Gaston. Gaston said black people don't have a decent restaurant or a place to sleep when they come from out of town. He built the place, the motel, then built a ballroom that everybody black who came through Birmingham performed, and everybody black who was good came through. Aretha Franklin. I'm talking about eventually all those people too stayed at the Gaston Motel and performed there. Now, the thing takes a turn in 1963. Gaston is negotiating with white leaders in Birmingham. Gaston is a respected voice because he got all this money and he is a black man. He never tried to act white. But then the confrontations escalate. The president of the United States comes to the Gaston Motels and meets with King, meets with A.G. Gaston and all them. And then there's the confrontation between the Public Safety Commissioner Bull Connor and those children in Birmingham. And right there in front of 16th Street Baptist Church, they shoot them fire hoses. And in the book Black Titan, they talk about how Gaston is on one of the top floors of his building, which is still there, looking across at Kelly Ingram Park, and he sees a little black girl propelled by the power of a fire hose that's supposed to be put on buildings to put out fire. He sees her riding that water in the middle of the air and then drop it and spinning down the street. And one of the lawyers, one of the white lawyers in Birmingham, who becomes a civil rights legend, who is helping the movement, calls him. And Gaston says, I'm sorry, I got to go because my people in the street and I got to help them. Hangs up on the guy. A.G. Gaston takes the turn. When I tell you, I'm leaving a lot out. A.G. Gaston's second wife was born into some means in a little place called Lowndes County, Alabama. That's where the Black Panther Party was freed, the Lowndes County Party. That's where they they call themselves arresting Imam Jamil Al-Amin, who we knew as H. Rap Brown, who's still fighting, battling health now, should not be in jail off some trumped up stuff they said happened in the West End of Atlanta, which is not true at all. But Lowndes County, Alabama, where A.G. Gaston and Miss Minnie grew up on their farm that they had, when they marched from Montgomery to Selma, and got there and the Klan threatening them and black people got guns on the other side, Dr. King being nonviolent, and A.G. Gaston said, I can't believe I could be nonviolent because when Dr. King spoke in Birmingham, the time that crazy white dude stormed the stage and punched him, A.G. Gaston was like, Dr. King believes in nonviolence. I don't. I believe that if somebody hit me, I got to hit them back. I mean, there's this complex, right? Well, when they left Selma, remember Viola Louiso, the white woman who got murdered by those white supremacists, transporting people back to Montgomery. That happened about 8 miles from Miss Minnie's family's farm, because when they left to go back to Montgomery, when they set up their base of operations and slept and camped on the farm of Miss Minnie Gaston. Black Titan. I mean, the story of A.G. Gaston, he wrote his own book, his one of his own memoir, which I understand. I did a little digging. It's supposed to be republished soon. I hope so. There's a Birmingham elected official who has said that they're going to try to republish his book. But I'm raising all this because A.G. Gaston is a story about Black politics, but it's a story also about class, because this is the Black elite, so-called elite, the same people that in Africa and beyond, and Ngugi is talking about here, that get gaslit into being against our interests. These are people who have different ideological positions. The SCLC people, the SCLC meeting is in Birmingham. Gaston houses the folk, creates space for them to convene. That's the time Dr. King got beat up, or at least they tried to really beat him up. They put him in jail. Oh, by the way, some other interesting things about the Gastons. When he was in his 80s, so he was 87, and Miss Minnie was maybe in her late 70s, they were kidnapped out of their house by a black dude. They called the police. They found them in the car, in the Gaston's car, in the back seat, beat up. He in the back seat. I think she was in the trunk. It's a terrible thing, but they survived. Of course, he lived to be 103. But the Gastons are fascinating, and I'm leaving a great deal out. So for time, because we're going to begin to wind this up. But We went over there and just to walk those spaces, imagine standing there and think, okay, that's the building where A.G. Gaston is looking at across the street as they put these fire hoses on these kids. And even though he and his wife had their funeral home, none of the four girls who were killed, and neither the two boys that were killed were handled by the Gastons, even though they were there front and center. And even as he was critical of the movement by saying, I knew this was going to happen. I know these people down here, they called it Birmingham. A.G. Gaston's house was bombed after he made the turn and said, okay, I got to do something different. And A.G. Gaston's life is a testimony to the fact that we can argue with each other about ideological purity and honesty and dishonesty and all these silly things. When in fact, upon closer scrutiny, we will find that we've always had these tensions, but when we come together, it becomes the platform for a different type of politics, the politics of generosity. And in those moments, we are free. It doesn't dismantle the systems. We got to fight those systems. But in that moment, we understand that we don't question the motives because you begin to know people like that when you face death together. And let me just say a couple more things about Mr. Gaston and I'll move on. A.G. Gaston, at the end of his life, decided, okay, I want to pass these businesses on. He had a son early on. His son had made transition. His son had children, so he could have gone through the family. His wife ends up not agreeing with this, but he did it anyway. A.G. Gaston, and by the way, the co-author who was his niece, Carol Jenkins. Prof, I don't know. Do you know Carol Jenkins? She's a media
Of course, I
person.
know her. Come
Carol,
on, that's New
oh,
York.
you know what?
NBC. Yeah, of course.
I'm tripping. You know what? Let me pause here and I'll finish this, but I want to ask you. I should have asked you this before I said anything else. You probably had her on about Black Titan, huh?
I've had her on, and I used to teach at Hunter, so we did a little program at the Roosevelt House, which is literally the house that FDR, his mama, and his wife lived in. To say
Yes.
less about that. And Miss Carol Jenkins was doing something for the ratification of the Women's Rights Amendment, needed one state. And we were doing these projects with young people at the Roosevelt House, and I was overseeing it there. So yeah, our paths have crossed, but also
Ooh.
growing up in New York, you see her on Channel
Yes.
4,
Yes.
Sue Simmons, Carol Jenkins, come on,
Is she
legend.
not? I don't know. Is she still around?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh my
What do you
gosh.
mean
You
she's
know
still
what?
around? Was
Okay.
she?
At this point, for the podcast, for the Black Women's Empowerment Network, she wrote the book with her daughter. She's
Yes,
the one.
yes.
AG Gat, she said she remembers growing up. There's a picture of her as a baby with Miss Gaston holding her on the porch in 1947 in Birmingham. I'm like, this is
Okay,
incredible.
you
I mean,
gave me an idea. And for the record, it's just the Women's Empowerment Network. We're not racist, not just Black women.
my bad. Well, no,
Okay, just
even if it
come
was
on.
Black women, it wouldn't be racist. But yes, I get you. The
Correct,
women's
correct,
empower.
correct. And even if it's
Yes,
only
yes,
Black women, it's still just
that's right.
women because we don't need to
It's
put Black to just. I'm just
no,
anyway.
no question. No, I'm
Mhm.
with you. No, and in fact, that's going to be a fantastic conversation. For Karen Hunter is awesome. I mean, I understand everybody else got shows, but that
Look,
need to be y'all
look at
talking
you.
because
Look at you.
no,
Like, now I gotta
no,
go program. Go ahead
no,
now.
seriously. I mean, no,
Love
because
it.
I mean that Gaston story. Oh my God, I haven't even. So this is the last one I'll mention in terms of the businesses. Mr. Gaston gets to the age. He's in his 90s now. Oh, by the way, the Gastons go to Haiti. They're invited to Haiti by the Haitian government. This is maybe in the 40s. They get down there and he says, I see the classism between the Haitian elite and the Haitian poor, but I see Black people running everything. I love it. And I also see people who have not lost a direct connection to their African culture. A.G. Gaston, who was a war hero of World War One, he and his wife, they go to Paris, they're in Hawaii for the 90th birthday, this kind of thing. But they go to Haiti when they're young. And he said, this is a different thing I'm thinking about. This man who was born in a city that was literally named for the French who had been fleeing Napoleon, who lost his war in part because the Haitians beat that ass. You can't make this up. This is why you got to have the momentum of memory. We don't. But anyway, yes. So they're in their night. He's in his nice. I'm getting ready to get these businesses up. His wife doesn't agree with it completely. In fact, she got some. Yeah, they're like, wait, what are you doing? At that time, he had about 9 businesses connected through the Booker T. Washington initiative, worth about 35 million. He says these Black people, who my wife, many of them she trained, she schooled. These Black people who have worked faithfully with us, you know what? They should run these businesses. He sells through stock plan a stock plan. He sells his businesses to the employees, 350 employees. The businesses are worth $35 million. A.G. Gaston sells through stock transfer those businesses to the employees, the black women and men who worked for him for $3.4 million, less than 10% of the value. So all these people say, oh, capitalism can't free us. Capitalism, it will collapse on itself. But here's the question. What do you do when you're born into a capitalist system? What do you do when you are raised by grandparents who came through captivity? What do you do when you're born in the heart of what Carter Woodson called a sequel to slavery? What do you do in a place where they are literally engaged in intellectual warfare and gaslight you every step of the way? What do you do when you are working in an iron smelting factory that's hotter than the hell of a July in Alabama and looking around you with these black men desperate to get a quarter here or a dollar here, and you done grown up figuring out how to get buttons from your playmates by having them swing on the swing in your granddaddy and grandmama yard. And so you start loaning them money and it ends up being an empire worth over 150, $140 million. And then at that point, you then begin to transfer stuff. What do? You empower your people. And Mr. Gaston said he had 10 rules of his life that he writes in his memoir, and he says, one of the things, and I love what Carol Jenkins and her daughter do. They start each chapter with a quote from him. And one of the quotes near the end of the book is, in fact, the book on the transfer. He says, you make money. You don't make money just for making money. You make money for what it can do to impact and change lives. He says, easy making money. Making money is just figure out the rules to make money and you'll make money. And when you read the book, every page, they wrote a hell of a book. Every page, you get a sense of not only him, but the history of everything going around. It's going around. It's meticulously written, and it's accessible. That's why I don't, like you, I'm not gonna lower my standards for people passing things off as books these days. No, and I shouldn't say this. Black Titan came, I want to say, in 2004. But at any rate, the Gaston story is a story of how to operate, how to involve yourself in governance in a gaslit society to tell you can't do anything. They can't you do anything. It's very innocent, and how you have debate, you have discussion, but then at the end of the day, when you are facing an existential threat, that little girl flying through the air on a damn stream of water and then rolling down the street, you say, nah, I've always been supportive. I've always been, maybe Andrew Young said that. He said, I think the reason that he bailed out the king out of jail was to continue to curry favor. And of course, Andrew Young would live to be the mayor of the city of Atlanta, where he kind of did the same thing. But at any rate, this isn't a criticism of Andrew Young. It's a recognition that politics require a certain type of pragmatic effort that only reaches maximum benefit for the rest of us when the community surrounds that politics, including being very critical at moments, which is very necessary, with their own form, whether it be a 19-year-old kid protesting the Tennessee legislature, whether it be Dr. King and them arguing, and Fred Shuttlesworth and Y.T. Walker arguing with A.C. Gaston as they're at his hotel eating the food that he's providing, even as he then intervenes in a different way. The politics become important because we are living in a society where we've all been gaslit into thinking that we're not fully human. So we left there, spent a few minutes at the Negro Southern League Museum, which I encourage all of y'all to visit. It is operated by the city of Birmingham. It says the Negro Southern League was founded in 1920, which is true. We talked to Bob Kendrick, of course, on the show, Sirius, who runs the Negro League Museum in Kansas City, 18th and Vine. The Negro Southern League founded the same year as the Negro Leagues in Chicago because they're all part of the same league, the Negro National League, the Negro Southern League, and the original teams, the original 8 teams, the Atlanta Black Crackers, the Birmingham Black Barons, of course. We saw them on display with our brother Roy Wood Jr. at the All-Star Game. By the way, Juneteenth, June 19th, there are still tickets for purchase, $12 a piece. They are playing the second East-West All-Star Game. Retired baseball players are going to be at Rickford Field in Birmingham. They're going to be playing there on Juneteenth, June 19th. CC Sabathia is going to be there. Adam Jones used to play for the Orioles, is going to be there. Ryan Howard from the Philadelphia Phillies. I'm like, look at these black dudes coming playing in this place, because at one time, Birmingham produced a core of major leaguers. And by major leaguers, I mean Negro leaguers, some of whom ended up in the white major leagues, like Willie Mays, like Satchel Paige out of Mobile, Alabama. Jack Robinson used to bring his teams down through, which is why I had to have one of these shirts. My man, the good brother Anthony Williams, who is one of the staff there at the museum. Spent a few minutes with him, talking with him. The Jacksonville Stars out of the Knoxville Giants, the Montgomery Gray Sox. They had a Gray Sox, the Nashville White Sox. I'm like, look at this, man. Look at this. The Pensacola Giants, the New Orleans Caulfield ads. Over the years, there were more than 80 teams in the Negro Southern Leagues. This isn't just about the Negro Southern Leagues, though. It's the story of the Negro Leagues generally. There's a white dude, Dr. Leighton Revel. Anthony was telling about him yesterday, who is the founder. Most of this stuff from his personal collection. He knew Negro Leaguers, many of them at one time, more Negro Leaguers lived in Birmingham than any other city in the country in terms of former Negro Leaguers. All of this stuff is incredible. The whole story of the Negro Leagues in the Negro Southern League Museum. And I wanted to mention it because, you know, Black self-determination isn't just fighting with the Trump administration in the United States. It isn't, it is a we have to start at the local level. And every city, that's one of the reasons I like going out, is because I get a chance to be in the space. I was reading the Times, I said Birmingham Times, and in the paper, a couple of things. I want to tie just one national story. We're going to talk about the immigration stuff and the courts fighting back, and then, a ruling came down Friday about that, trying to cancel not just temporary protection status. Trump and them have got after that, at least procedurally. They got to rule on the merits, the Supreme Court does, and they're losing just about every case on the merits. So I think that's going to, work out. Even as the trade tariffs, I think we all saw the press conference this week where he got a new nickname, Taco Man. I've got to be a taco man, TACO. Trump always chickens out, but at any rate, he was very upset about that. But the small businesses are suffering. Learned today about a small business, Black woman business in Texas, that is suffering because the tariffs, even the threat of tariffs, messing up the supply chain, driving up the cost. Now she's got inventory that she's trying to sell now because she got to go out of business. It's like, really? That's what we're doing here? Yeah, because I don't know, there's the uncertainty. But at any rate, we're not going to talk about the Trump stuff except this one story that is on page 3 of the Birmingham Times. This is the new one, just came out yesterday, 29th of May, rather. College program for Black women canceled weeks before start. This is the story. Now, let me go on. This is by Walicia Morris. I love these Black names. Fanuel Manuel said having a fellow Black woman as a mentor helped her visualize a future in computer science. Manuel and hundreds of other high school students received training, mentorship, and support on advanced placement tests as part of a national effort to encourage more Black women to enter computer science. I could see myself succeeding in the future, said Manuel, who is now a fresh person. I say fresh person, they wrote freshman, at the University of Alabama. I would say it's a lot more encouraging seeing somebody do it first that looks like you. Now, I'm thinking about this in the context of the school that Miss Minnie Gaston ran, the Booker T. Washington School, where they trained thousands of people. And now here we are in the summer of 2025 without the momentum of memory, realizing that, well, she goes on. She writes, University of Alabama and Tuskegee University were 2 of 7 colleges that offered programming funded by one of the grants terminated by the National Science Foundation in April. Now the $3.5 million program has come to a halt weeks before students were set to arrive on University of Alabama campus in June. The Legacy Program was the name of this program. Politics don't matter. Democrats, Republicans the same. Y'all keep talking. God bless you. No, what you're not going to do is misrepresent me or anybody else. And if it were going to be a good faith conversation, we could have that conversation because I believe that people operate being gaslit with very thin margins of knowledge. And if we had a full conversation, it might be a little embarrassing for some of the people. But let me be very clear. There is difference in politics. Ask AC Gaston, ask the people who have had to deal and struggle in the real world. And this is a real world implications. This is a real world example of how elections have consequences. Let me finish reading this. The Legacy Program, a collaboration between 7 predominantly white and historically Black colleges. The language, seven historically white and historically Black colleges plan to work with 600 students from Mississippi, Ohio, Michigan, and Alabama through 2028. The year-long program includes mentorship from leaders at companies like Intel and training on computer and coding. Black women make up only 3% of the tech workforce, and even fewer Black women have leadership roles in Silicon Valley. That program been cut. They lost the funding. Think about A.G. Gaston, who also wrote and said that he thought it was very important to fight for civil rights. We need to have the right to vote. He exercised that right. He fought for it. He funded the fight for it. He said, now, this fight to get into these white companies and integrate these companies, I think that's okay. But the most important thing is for us to have Black companies, not just open up access to employment, but access to build your own. And when it hit different, as the kids would say, it hit different when AC Gaston bust up in the room, say, hey, and for people to say, well, he's a capitalist, the capitalist doesn't work. The man turned over his companies worth 35 million to employees for $3.4 million in stock. If he was worried, even his wife was like, what you doing, AG? AG say, hey, man, the reason you make money is to empower the community. Is it humane capitalism? I'll let the theoreticians grapple with the language as they write for publication at white places. And I'm sure A.G. Gaston, who published his own memoir, when they said, well, you could get a contract with the white publisher, why would I do that? I got money. I'm going to pay the people to print it. I'm going to bypass any editorial board anyway, and we going to do this. And I'm telling you, when you walk into that place and you see those sisters who are rangers, the two young Black women who helped us yesterday, and then you walk next door to the coffee shop at a woman and man friends who went into business together in the coffee shop talking with elders, and the young lady who was sitting there with her friend who was at Alabama State, it hit different when you go into a Black space that Black people still control. And that's what we have to aspire to, that we don't get gaslit.
I mean, I love the conversation you had today with Lamont about that. And he was struggling with what you were saying because, we have been indoctrinated with this drumbeat of inferiority. You're inferior, you're inferior, you're inferior. You can't do it, you can't do it. And it's everything that you're saying, the truth is right there. How do we
It's right
build
there.
Wilmington? How do we build Rosewood? How do we build Greenwood? How do all of these, summer of 1919, all of these communities get decimated if they weren't built? And Black Fortunes, I love Carol Jenkins. I reached out to her.
Yeah.
I sent her an email. So thank you. I sent her an email while we were talking. But Shamari Wills's Black Fortunes gives the story of Charles. Why am I blanking right now? Memphis, Beale Street.
You talking about Robert Church?
Robert Church
Yes.
Sr., right? The story of Robert Church Sr. is in there. So we just got to read more and remember.
That's what we got to do.
That's it. Yeah.
It's not hard. And again, I'm not gonna get into any back and forth for anybody talking about anything. I would just say this. I would just say this in closing, because again, the work is the most important thing. We should never, let me not say that. I don't want to say that. I was gonna say we should never do something, but people do what they want. I mean, we should always elevate the best practices that have helped us, regardless of where they come. Ideological purity is nice. Ideological purity is safe. Ideological purity is it feels very good when you got little communities doing that. But if that had been the philosophy of Arthur George Gaston, Birmingham turns out very differently, which means we turn out very differently. If that had been the philosophy of Martin King and Fred Shuttlesworth, it had been the philosophy of Septima Clark or Fannie Hamer, we turn out very differently.
And I think this is important that we abdicate specialness to those people, which is why I wanted you to tell us your origin story, right? Because it just requires all of us to do something, right? This man's raised in a household with a man that was enslaved in a log cabin. Like it's not like, so if you're thinking about, I can't do it or we can't do it. People were doing it when there were no resources, there were no opportunities to even see yourself. There were no abundance of millionaires, Black millionaires and Black, businesses. People did it because they had an imagination of what was possible inside of them. And so you too, all of you, have something to do. Get up and do, like you said. Like it's
get up and do.
Our biggest problem is that we think somebody else is going to do it.
Yes.
Someone else. Yes. Oh, that's for someone else. No, it's for you. Get up.
Yes.
Yeah.
And in fact, I'm glad you mentioned that because it reminded me. There's a story they tell early on. He's on the farm. A.G. Gaston's little boy, not the farm. He's at the house. His granddaddy used to pull out. He said one of the few members, and you when you talk to her, then y'all can talk about. Obviously, they interviewing, getting this memory. A.G. Gaston said, my granddaddy would pull out of his wallet a piece of Confederate money, folded up piece of paper, and he would tell me about what it was like to go through slavery. Gaston said, of the memories I have of my grandfather, that's one of the most indelible. And this is a little boy who would end up being, Black Enterprise called him the entrepreneur of the century because they got an interpretive center past the cafe that they have. And you see all the pictures, you see his desk, you see all this, and they got the framed picture from Black Enterprise, entrepreneur of the century. This is the guy. At one time, they called him the richest Black man in America. And he said, my granddaddy would pull out this folded up piece of worthless Confederate money, not because he worshiped the Confederacy, but because he wanted his grandson to know this is what we went through. But A.G. Gaston did not walk through his life with the trauma of being victimized. This man, even though he was kidnapped and beat up, him and his wife, he's 87 years old by a Black dude who they said was mentally ill. They gave him life in Alabama. And you can ask her, what happened to him. But when they asked him later, hey man, does this make you, about the Black community? He said, I already forgot about that. Wait a minute. Now, he claimed at trial, the guy claimed it was a white dude that kid. No, it wasn't no white dude. A.G. Gaston's, because you can see how that would very quickly turn into a narrative where we be gaslit. See,
Right.
this is what we mean. Black people not going, A.G. Gaston, I forgot about that. And I don't mean his wife forgot about it because they end up having armed guards around the house. But again, it's complicated. But yeah, get up and do. That's the message. We must govern in a gaslit society because we're at the end of the empire.
We are.
Anyway,
And I feel it.
so
I
anyway,
feel it. All right. I got to
we
run.
can feel it. I know you do. Love you.
All right. Love you too. Love
See
everybody.
y'all later.
Some of y'all in a few minutes and
See you in
Sirius
a few minutes.
XM.
Yeah, I'm gonna tune
Tomorrow.
in. I'll see you later.
Tomorrow,
Oh.
Nubia and Refill, we're finally doing it, 6 p.m. There's gonna be Lumumba. What is it?
Lumumba or
No, hold on. Easy put it there. Nubia Refill, Saturday, 6 p.m. Eastern. Soundtrack to a coup d'etat tomorrow.
Oh,
Okay.
you're gonna move it to Nubian Refill tomorrow?
Yeah, tomorrow
Okay,
at 6 p.m.
I might be on the road. I may be coming back from the funeral. I'll try to
Okay.
jump in. Okay.
All right, well, it'll be there, and Marlon is gonna be moderating. Okay, I love it. I love people getting involved. I love this. Okay.
Is that okay? Very good. Well, y'all have fun. I do think though, when we talk about it, maybe we'll talk about it. What just happened?
That's all right. You flip, but that's okay.
Am I sitting sideways? Hold on a second.
Yes, you are.
No,
You are.
I don't like that. Anyway, you know what? That is ancestral. No,
yes.
that's ancestral. Yes, because maybe yes, it is because on Monday we'll have to because Haile did a very detailed analysis of soundtrack to a coup d'etat, which is why I wanted to make sure. So maybe everybody who watches that tomorrow, Saturday, we come in. Those of you who come in, and we're going to have a conversation about that. I think it might be a little different than what people might be experiencing and watching real time. But we'll see.
Okay.
In fact, I want Marlon, you come in Monday because I want to have a conversation with you as we talk in real time about this. It's very good. That's good to know.
Okay.
All right, love you. Gotta go.
Safe travels.
See,
Love you.
you too. Love you.
All right, everyone. Thank you. See y'all in a few.